The big news hitting the headlines at the moment is that the movie actor and star and two Academy Award winner, Gene Hackman, aged 95, has been found dead with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, who's aged 63, and their dog. Now, to a consultant psychiatrist who's used to dealing with suicidal people, the evidence so far, given the Santa Fe Sheriff Department have said they're investigating the deaths of these two people found in close proximity with each other, but also that they don't expect or think there's any foul play, that would make any expert used to dealing with this kind of very tragic situation, including myself, a psychiatrist, wonder whether there's a particular phenomenon that's happened here called a suicide pact. A suicide pact is when two people decide together to kill themselves, and very frequently, as in this case, it's a husband and wife situation, but it can be two brothers, two sisters, a mother and a son, etc., etc. Many people will never have heard of a suicide pact, but basically, roughly speaking, 1% of all suicides worldwide are a suicide pact of some description, involving two or more people. In the United Kingdom, statistically speaking, there's roughly speaking one suicide pact every month. So although it's 1% of all suicides, it's not actually that rare. There is some evidence that in fact the incidence could be increasing. Several research studies were published during COVID which indicated there was a heightened rise in couples killing themselves, and one of the theories about that was that one or both of them were very frightened they got COVID, were worried they'd communicated with each other, and also they were facing dramatic economic pressure due to the lockdown that had occurred and the close proximity of each other. All sorts of those factors came together to suggest to some psychiatrists there'd actually been a rise in husband-wife suicide pacts during the COVID outbreak. There's also been some studies from India that suggest married couples in India, particularly young married couples or young couples trying to get married, there's an increasing rate of suicide pacts in that particular demographic group. And one theory about why that's happening in India is to do with the fact that maybe in India there's more strong parental disapproval of two people getting together when the parents don't really approve, and that leads to a major obstacle in the two people getting together. And actually this remarkably similarly resembles the play Romeo and Juliet, with William Shakespeare writing that play. And it could be regarded as a kind of Romeo and Juliet syndrome, when two people are very closely attached and can't bear to think about life without the other. But going back to this particular possible suicide pact, the research evidence indicates, and of course this is mere speculation at the moment given not much news has been released, that generally speaking what you'll find is the more elderly the couple has experienced a life event of some kind, maybe a diagnosis of a life-ending or terminal disease that's coming upon them quite soon, they feel that it's not really worth carrying on. And it is interesting that Gene Hackman does seem to have led a rather reclusive life in the last decade or so. And that person feels that really the only way to move on and avoid a lot of suffering is to do away with themselves and commit the act of suicide. And their partner feels they can't really survive without them. It's a signal of a very close attachment, and that is why a suicide pact would occur in that situation. However, while that may account for the vast majority of suicide pacts, psychiatrists are worried that in some extreme examples, what's really happening is a dominant partner has coerced or persuaded or manipulated the less dominant partner into doing away with themselves. And in the very extreme forms, where people share a psychotic disorder, that is referred to by psychiatrists as a folie à deux. That's when two people share a delusional belief, maybe it's something to do with the idea that actually life isn't worth continuing, and in that situation, the suicide pact seems doubly tragic because it's arising out of psychological disorder that perhaps if treated means that actually in both cases, or at least in one case, the suicide didn't have to occur. Demographically and statistically, the research evidence is, and we'll soon discover this, maybe, that actually suicide pacts are much more likely to leave a suicide note compared to suicides where there isn't a suicide pact. The other bit of evidence that's quite interesting about suicide pacts is the theory that the internet is making them more common, particularly between people who arrange a suicide pact on the internet who are not actually living together or living close to each other. And there is some evidence of a rise of incidents in suicide pacts between people who visit suicide-orientated websites and, as a result of being connected via the internet, decide to do away with themselves as a result. The main thing people, experts, psychiatrists will be very worried about with this kind of incident and the reporting that will follow is whether we'll see a spate of copycats. That has not been shown to be likely to happen in the case of a suicide pact between a married couple, but given the suicide pacts that can occur because of the internet, there would be a concern of a rise of copycats following this very tragic situation. So copycat behavior, particularly via the internet, is thought to occur when someone is feeling a bit low, would normally not have thought about suicide or killing themselves, but as a result of hearing an internet story or reading a newspaper story, think about suicide as a solution to feeling depressed and despairing. And there is a lot of evidence that people who, at some level, demographically feel similar to the celebrity they may be reading about who's killed themselves or died in tragic circumstances, there is some link that seems to inspire copycat behavior. So, for example, Princess Diana, when she died in the 1990s, there was a spate of suicides, a peak or a burst of copycat suicides that appeared in the weeks following her death, very interestingly in women, roughly speaking, of her age. So that's an example of where copycat behavior may be occurring because people might have thought of themselves or identified with a celebrity, were feeling a bit low, wouldn't normally think about suicide as a solution, but become doubly despairing because the person they identify with or they follow, and particularly perhaps a celebrity, they think to themselves, if that person couldn't find a way to make life worth living, how can I find a way to make life worth living? So there are all sorts of psychological mechanisms occurring that may explain copycat behavior. As a result of this, there have been media guidelines where you will notice that newspapers and internet sites don't publish graphic details of how the suicide occurred, because the theory is that if you do that, you're more likely to create copycat behavior where people follow the exact methods. And again, this followed an example of a famous footballer in Germany who killed himself by throwing himself on a railroad track and died tragically because of colliding with a train as a result. And there was a spate of people killing themselves by that method in Germany a short time after that. So that is why you will find on the internet, and I think we'll find in this particular case with Gene Hackman and his wife, there will not be a reporting, because of following of media guidelines, of the graphic means by which people do away with themselves.